And if I told you that modern public debt was born in the blood of wars, the taxes on your beer, and a gigantic stock market scam, who really paid for the South Sea Company's fortune? Kings, bankers, or millions of anonymous people? James II, last Catholic steward on the throne, staggers under the rumor of foreign footsteps. Sails loom in the mist of the North Sea. William of Orange, a prince from the Dutch Republic, advances, draped in the pale light of silent cannons. He does not come alone. He carries with him the shadow of parliaments, the prayers of landowners, the calculations of merchants, the expectation of a new order. Then Parliament rises. It decides. It calls William and Mary. It does not raise a simple royal couple. It erects a pact, an oath, a limit. The power that believed itself absolute finds itself caught in the mesh of laws. In 1689, the Bill of Rights engraves in stone what only yesterday was just a murmur. No more taxes without consent. No more spending without oversight. The hand that holds the scepter no longer rules the kingdom's purse alone. The House of Commons lengthens its shadow. It debates, it counts, it demands. The voices of the counties, of the gentry, of the city's merchants are woven into a single thread. To control money is to control war. England then forges itself a new face, that of a fiscal military state, strained towards conflict, fed by taxation, living on credit. The kingdom's fate merges with its capacity to raise taxes, to issue debt, to sustain armies that no longer sleep. For war is coming, as always. It breaks out in 1689, the War of the League of Augsburg. Europe is torn apart. Louis XIV, the Sun King, stretches his burning rays across the continent. England, the Dutch Republic, the German states stand against him. Regiments must be raised, fleets armed, distant allies paid, whose flags flap in foreign tongues. Gold trickles, drop by drop, from the treasury's coffers to lands the English will never see. Peace returns for a while, too short. The War of the Spanish Succession takes up the torch again in 1701. More battles, more seas crossed, more subsidies paid to princes and electors, more ships loaded with cannons gliding towards the Mediterranean and the Atlantic. The war machine turns, and behind it, another machine, quieter, more relentless, that of debt. Before 1688, public debt looked like a stream. At the beginning of the 1710s, it is a river. Around 55 million pounds swell the kingdom's chest like a weight fixed around its neck. An amount that is no longer abstract. It can be read in the smoke of battles, in the sails rotting in the arsenals, in overdue payslips, in markets where meat grows more expensive. On one side, floating debt, short, nervous. It is the exchequer bill that promises payment tomorrow. It is the soldier's pay that is deferred, the grocer's bill who feeds the fleet, the supply contract hastily signed on the edge of a camp. These sums roll like waves, always to be honored, always to be pushed back. On the other side, consolidated debt, long, heavy. These are life annuities, tontines, annuities and perpetual rents that are passed down from generation to generation, written into wills, slipped into the hands of widows and orphans. There, time stretches. The state promises, sometimes in perpetuity, a regular flow of interest. At the center, the treasury gasps for air. It borrows in London, in the narrow alleys of the city, under the signs of the goldsmith bankers. Coffers open and close. Brokers whisper numbers. The state is no longer a king who commands by decree. It becomes a borrower who negotiates, who seduces, who cajoles the trust of those who have gold to lend. The kingdom weaves a fiscal net to service the debt it has birthed. Customs duties bite into the goods passing through the ports, cutting a share of every ton of sugar, tobacco, silks, exotic wood. Excise duties slip into the mug of beer, the grain of salt, the smoke of tobacco. The land tax every year strikes the land, the field, the estate, reminding the gentry that it shares the burden of the cannons. Even state lotteries become instruments of this grand scheme. The illusion of a sudden windfall in exchange for the certainty for the state of immediate funds. At the other end of the chain, some collect these droplets transformed into rivers. The subscribers to the debt, sharp-eyed merchants, bankers who add up the interest, cautious aristocrats, widows living off an annuity, orphans whose capital rests on public faith. The state itself benefits. It gets the money for its wars immediately, by reaching out to the future rather than by crushing direct taxes even further in the present. Under the Tonnage Act, a group of subscribers advances £1.2 million to the government. In exchange, it receives a charter, a privilege, the right to issue banknotes. A new creature appears, half private, half public, a pivot between the treasury and the market.
The Bank of England becomes the financial agent of the state. It receives fragments of the debt and manages them. It issues banknotes, promises convertible into gold, which begin to circulate like a second bloodstream through the veins of the economy. It discounts public securities, giving them a second life, a mobility that transforms debts into instruments of commerce. Around it, in London, a secondary market is born in the narrow change alley. Exchequer tallies, banknotes, annuities are traded there, their prices rising and falling with the news of war, rumors of peace, ministerial crises. Brokers and jobbers give the debt a daily price. It is no longer just a frozen contract. It is the living object, tossed about by fear and greed. But this architecture has its flaws. The state depends on the markets. If prices shake, its ability to finance itself falters. In times of war or political crisis, the prices of securities waver. The Tories, staunch defenders of land and the gentry, look with suspicion at these moneyed interests who seem to dominate the city. These men who do not own fields but numbers, and derive their power not from landed property but from the state's own debt. In this whirlpool, other powers arise. The East India Company already rules the Asian seas, carrying in its holds spices, textiles, later tea, but also increasingly silver and credit. It has a royal charter. It lends to the state. It circulates fortunes. The Bank of England, still young, seeks to be the pivot of public credit, but it must reckon with these joint stock companies that are advancing their own pieces. An idea then takes shape in the back rooms of power, to use these companies as vast containers to absorb the public debt. They are granted commercial privileges. In return, they take on their shoulders segments of the state's debt. This model, sketched out with the East India Company, haunts the corridors of Westminster. The Whigs, close to the city, see in it a tool. The Tories, close to the countryside, see in it a threat, a blurring of the line between public interest and private appetite, between the state and speculators. By an act of parliament, this South Sea Company is founded. Its official face shines with exoticism, monopolizing trade with Spanish America, securing the right to supply African slaves to the Spanish colonies, mastering a world of distant ports like Portobello or Veracruz. The asiento, that sinister contract, already looms on the horizon. There is talk of gold, silver, plantations, a promise of tropical wealth. It is entrusted with the mission of taking over a large part of the state's floating debt, nearly 9 to 10 million pounds. The state's creditors, those who hold banknotes, arrears of pay, supply contracts, are given the possibility of exchanging their uncertain claims for shares in the company. In a single stroke, the state transforms a short-term pressing debt into consolidated debt. The company, in return, receives annual interest from the treasury, guaranteed by specific taxes. It redistributes this interest in the form of dividends to its shareholders. The magic works. What was a chaos of notes payable tomorrow becomes a steady stream of income dressed in the prestige of a joint stock company. Who benefits from all this? The creditors converted into shareholders who trade the anxiety of deferred payment for the hope of dividends and capital gains. The company's leaders and political promoters who place themselves at the center of a new universe of power. The government, which can finally breathe, seeing the pressure of the floating debt ease, transformed into a longer-term consolidated annuity. But from birth, doubt inhabits the creature. The real profits to be drawn from trade with Spanish America are uncertain. Will the Spaniards tolerate this English intrusion? The company depends, in truth, much more on the annuity the state pays it than on tropical gold. Its strength rests on the confidence of the bondholders, on the certainty that the treasury will continue to pay, that taxes will continue to flow in. In 1713, at Utrecht, the illusion becomes a contract. The War of the Spanish Succession comes to an end, and, around the negotiating tables, Great Britain rests two trophies that seem magnificent. The Asiento de Esclavos for 30 years, granted to the South Sea Company, opened the slave trade to the Spanish colonies for that company. Sometimes, the Spanish crown itself is associated with it. Sometimes, the logistical support of the East India Company. A yearly ship of 500 tons can also, theoretically, dock at Portobello or Veracruz, loaded with legal goods and hidden contraband. The company therefore sets up a few trading posts, a few operations. Ships leave, loaded with chained bodies. Account books record cargoes, profits, losses. But when one goes through the figures, a conclusion imposes itself. The commercial revenues are far, very far from the dreams that had justified so many speeches. The years pass. The shape of the kingdom congeals around this system. Around 1718 to 1719, the total public debt still hovers around 50 to 55 million pounds. The South Sea Company already holds an important part of this mountain in the form of long-term annuities. The rest is scattered like stars. Annuities, state lotteries, various rents, in the hands of a multitude of rentiers. A new king came to the throne in 1714, George I from Hanover. With him, the Whigs dominate the government. They have a clear objective: to reduce the cost of this debt, lower its interest, simplify its entanglement, calm a financial system shaken by the last years of Anne's reign and by the tensions of the succession. In the city, speculation intensifies. Shares are traded feverishly. Annuities change hands at a new speed. At the center of this whirlwind, a man and a company move their pieces forward. John Blunt, a former goldsmith banker, now stands at the helm of the South Sea Company. Blunt understands the government's hunger, the market's thirst, the fatigue of scattered rentiers. He sees the company as a unique instrument, a lever, a gear capable of transforming the entirety of the debt into one large block under a single banner, that of the South Seas. On the eve of 1719, the stage is set. A heavily indebted state, a financial tool ready to expand, a London market overheated by trading in shares and securities, a company that has not fulfilled its commercial promises but firmly holds the threads of the debt. Then is born the project that will change everything. The South Sea Company proposes to take over an immense share of the remaining national debt. It no longer wants to absorb only the floating debt. It wants all, or almost all, of the annuities weighing on the kingdom. In exchange, it promises shares. In exchange, it offers the government the prospect of a unified, rationalized debt bearing a lower interest rate. It promises to the holders of annuities the possibility of giving up their fixed claims to launch themselves into a security that, it is believed, can only rise. In the corridors of the Treasury, in the halls of Parliament, negotiations begin. John Aislabie, Chancellor of the Exchequer, listens. The Whigs weigh the risks, watch the Bank of England prepare a competing plan. The Tories, the wary, whisper of dangers. But the promise is dazzling. To lighten the burden of interest, clarify the landscape of the debt, and also flatter the hopes of enrichment of those who will exchange their annuities for shares. Behind those walls, in London, in the mud of the streets, thousands of lives unknowingly await the coming shock. The rentiers, small and large, do not know that they are approaching the edge of a glittering abyss. The taxpayers, who already pay in silence, do not yet see that the burden they carry will serve as fuel for a fever they do not control.